Danielle Whitfield was 33 years old when her husband threw $14 in cash into her hands and told her not to come back. Roland didn't yell. He didn't need to. He just packed her bag himself, walked her to the car, and bought her a one-way bus ticket while their neighbors watched from their porches. He called her unstable, used up, replaceable. What Roland didn't know was that Danny had spent the last 6 years doing every set of books at Whitfield Restoration, the company he took full credit for building himself. He didn't know she'd found the second account the night before, the one funneling client deposits into a downtown condo lease, co-signed by his site coordinator. He handed her a bus ticket like he was erasing her. He had no idea he was buying his own countdown. Danny said nothing. She just watched her house disappear through the window and started counting everything he'd forgotten she knew. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The kitchen smelled like cold coffee and printer ink. Danny sat at the table with her reading glasses on, a yellow legal pad to her left, and Roland's company laptop open in front of her. The clock above the stove read 11:07 p.m. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Inside, the only sound was the soft tap of her fingers on the keyboard and the occasional scratch of her pen. She was reconciling the invoices for the Harmon Street project. 3 subcontractors, 2 material suppliers, and 1 permit fee that had been filed under the wrong expense code. She found the error in 11 minutes. She always found the errors. That was what she did. Dinner had been at Caruso's, the kind of restaurant with cloth napkins folded into little peaks and candles that dripped wax down the sides of glass holders. Roland had worn his gray blazer, the one that made him look like he belonged in a magazine. He had ordered the salmon and smiled at the clients like he'd known them his whole life. The clients were a husband and wife, the Merritts, who wanted a full exterior restoration on their historic property in the Elmwood district. Big job, the kind that could carry the company through the first quarter. Danny had done the research on the permit requirements. She had called the city office twice, written up a 3-page summary, and flagged a zoning conflict that would have stalled the entire project by 6 weeks if left alone. She found the workaround. She drafted the language. She handed it to Roland the morning before dinner in a plain manila folder. At the table, Mr. Merritt had leaned forward and asked, "How'd you get ahead of that zoning issue? Our last contractor didn't even catch it." Roland had smiled. He set down his fork slowly, the way he did when he wanted to seem thoughtful. "Honestly," he said, "experience. You just learn to see around corners in this business." Mrs. Merritt had looked impressed. Mr. Merritt had nodded. Danny had reached for her water glass and said nothing. Later, in the car, she told herself it didn't matter. He was the face of the company. That was the arrangement. She handled the numbers, the filings, the problems nobody saw coming. He handled the room. It worked. She told herself it worked. Back at the kitchen table, she pulled the Harmon Street file closer and wrote a note in the margin of her legal pad. "Reclassify permit fee to admin. Confirm with city receipt." Her handwriting was small and even. It had always been that way. Her mother used to say Danny wrote like someone who never wasted anything. She rubbed the back of her neck and rolled her shoulders. The chair was starting to hurt. She'd been sitting since 9. The thing she didn't let herself think about too long, the thing that lived in the back of her mind like a low hum she couldn't quite locate, was the comment Roland had made last Sunday. They'd been getting ready for his company's anniversary cookout, and she'd tried on a sundress she hadn't worn since the year before. It fit fine. She'd thought it looked fine. Roland had glanced at her from the doorway and said, "That dress was better on you before." Just like that, flat, like he was commenting on the weather. She changed into slacks and a blouse and hadn't brought it up. She wasn't going to be the kind of woman who needed reassurance about a dress. She was 33 years old. She was past that. But sometimes, when she was tired like this, the comment surfaced. And behind it came the other thing, the quiet grief she'd never fully named out loud. The miscarriage, 2 years ago. The way Roland had gone back to work the next day. The way her body had felt like a place she no longer trusted. The way he had started looking at her differently after that, or maybe she had only started noticing it then. She closed the file. She took off her glasses and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. "You're tired," she told herself. "That's all this is." The front door opened at 11:42. Roland came in without calling out. He set his keys on the side table by the door, she heard the familiar jingle, and walked through the living room into the kitchen. He was still in his work clothes, but his collar was open and his jacket was folded over his arm in a way that seemed deliberate, like he'd done it in the car before coming in. "You're still up," he said, not a question. "Harmon Street invoices," she said. He nodded like she'd told him something unimportant. He set his company laptop on the counter, poured himself a glass of water, and said he was going to shower. Then he walked down the hall. She heard the bathroom door close. The pipes knocked once as the water turned on. Danny put her glasses back on. She reached for the legal pad, but her eyes drifted to the counter, to Roland's laptop, where the screen had not gone dark. There was a spreadsheet open, column headers, rows of figures. She recognized the format. She'd built the template herself 2 years ago, but the account name in the top cell wasn't one she recognized. It wasn't one she had ever created. The shower was still running. Danny didn't move right away. She sat at the kitchen table, glasses on, pen in her hand, and looked at the laptop screen from across the room. The account name sat there in the top cell, quiet and small, like it wasn't anything. But she knew what it was. She'd spent 6 years as a forensic accountant before she left her firm to manage Roland's books full-time. She had found hidden money in places people didn't think to look. Inside payroll rounding errors, inside vendor credits, inside miscoded freight charges that added up to $40,000 over 2 years. She knew what a clean account looked like, and she knew what a hidden one felt like. This felt like a hidden one. She got up slowly, padded across the kitchen in her socks, and sat down on the bar stool in front of the counter. She tilted the screen toward her. The account was named WR Logistics Reserve. There was no vendor file under that name, no city filing, no contract she had ever processed. The column headers matched her own template. She could see the bones of her own work underneath it, but the entries were wrong. Client deposit figures she recognized from active projects had been split. Part went to the main operating account, the way it should, but a slice, sometimes 8%, sometimes 12%, never the same number twice, had been redirected here. WR Logistics Reserve. Roland didn't know enough about accounting to build something like this. He barely knew how to run a pivot table. Somebody had helped him. She clicked into the transaction history. The earliest entry was dated 14 months ago. She did the math in her head without meaning to. 14 months ago, she had been dealing with her mother's hip surgery and had been less present in the books for nearly 6 weeks. 6 weeks was all it had taken. Her jaw tightened. She kept scrolling. Hotel charges appeared as site equipment rental. There were 4 of them, all downtown, all Thursday nights. She recognized 2 of the hotel names. The other 2 were nicer than anything Roland had ever expensed for actual work. There was a jewelry receipt attached to a scanned document in the file folder. She clicked it open. A bracelet. Gold with a small diamond clasp. $412. The receipt was addressed to a personal email she didn't recognize, an account she had never seen on any company filing. She did not let herself feel it. Not yet. She set the feeling aside the way she set aside invoice errors, flagged, noted, to be dealt with after the full picture was clear. She kept clicking. The condo lease application was buried inside a subfolder labeled Insurance Docs 2023. She almost missed it. But she had built these folders herself, and she knew everything that belonged in them, which meant she knew everything that didn't. She opened it. 2 signatures at the bottom of the application. Roland's, and below his, neat and confident, Vanessa Cole. Danny had met Vanessa twice, once at the company's end-of-year gathering, and once on a job site walkthrough in the spring. Vanessa coordinated subcontractor schedules and managed site logistics. She was organized, quick with numbers. Roland had hired her 18 months ago and called her a find. A find. Danny opened the permit subfolder. The falsified documents were not difficult to spot, not for someone who had filed legitimate ones for years. The formatting was just slightly off on 3 permits. Margins wrong, the city code sequence out of order in a way the actual city office never did it. But what caught her eye were the initials in the bottom right corner. Every real permit she had filed bore her own initials, DW, per the internal tracking system she had set up herself. These 3 permits read VC. Vanessa hadn't just been in Roland's bed. She had been in the books. Danny sat very still for a moment. The refrigerator hummed. The shower ran on upstairs. Then she reached for her phone. She worked quickly and without sound, the way she did everything. She photographed each screen with steady hands: the Shell account summary, the transaction history, the hotel charges, the jewelry receipt, the condo lease application, the falsified permits. She moved through each tab the way she moved through an audit, methodically, completely, leaving nothing to chance. When she photographed the lease application, she made sure both signatures were in frame. She checked each photo before she moved on. Clear, sharp, legible. Good enough for a lawyer. Good enough for a licensing board. Good enough for a federal fraud examiner, if it ever came to that. When she was done, she closed each tab in the same order she'd opened them, until the spreadsheet sat on the screen exactly as it had been when she first walked over. WR Logistics Reserve. Undisturbed, like she'd never been there. She stood up and walked back to the kitchen table and sat down and picked up her pen. Upstairs, the shower went quiet. A moment later, she heard the soft thud of the bathroom door, then the creak of the hallway floor, then the sound of footsteps, slow and unhurried, starting toward the top of the stairs. Roland came downstairs in a gray t-shirt and sweatpants, hair damp, phone in his hand. He didn't look at her. He went straight to the counter, picked up the laptop, and carried it to the kitchen table. Danny kept her pen moving. She was cross-referencing a materials invoice against a contractor payment, the same work she'd been doing before midnight. Her glasses were still on. Her coffee was cold. She heard him click through something, then stop. Click again. Stop. The silence in the kitchen changed. It got a different weight to it. You went in the laptop. She didn't answer right away. She finished the line she was writing first. I was working, she said. That's not what I asked you. His voice was flat. You went into my files. She looked up at him. He was standing at the table, the laptop open in front of him, his jaw set. There was something behind his eyes she had seen before. Not guilt, but the panic that comes just before a man who has no good explanation decides to build a wall out of anger instead. Your files, she said calmly, in the company laptop, that I set up. Don't do that, he pointed at her. Don't get slick with me, Danny. Roland, you were snooping. He said the word like it tasted sharp. Going through things that are none of your business. She took her glasses off and set them on the table. The company books are my business. They've always been my business. Not anymore. He shut the laptop. I've been looking at bringing someone in. Someone with fresh eyes. Someone whose initials are VC? The room went very quiet. Roland's face shifted. The panic moved through him fast and came out the other side as something uglier. He straightened up. His chin went out. You don't know what you're talking about. Okay, she said. You found nothing. You don't understand what you're looking at. Okay, Roland. Stop saying that. He slapped his hand flat on the table, and the sound cracked through the kitchen like a branch breaking. You think you're so smart. You have always thought you were so much smarter than me. That's been the problem this whole time. That is why this marriage is where it is. Danny said nothing. She looked at him steadily. You've let yourself go, he said. His voice dropped, got quieter, and that made it worse. You've been checked out for 2 years. Ever since. He stopped, then kept going anyway. I've tried. I've been patient with you, but you're not the woman I married. You're used up, Danny. You're worn out. And I deserve better than a woman who sits in my kitchen at midnight, playing detective instead of being a wife. She picked her pen up off the table. She set it on top of the invoice folder. She aligned the edge of the folder with the edge of the table. Are you done? She asked. I'm done with you, he said. I want you out of this house. He said it like he'd already planned it. That was what told her the most. He went upstairs and came back down 12 minutes later with her weekender bag. She had watched him go and had not moved from her chair, had not walked to the window, had not done anything except sit with her hands folded on the table and her phone in her cardigan pocket, solid and warm, with every photograph still on it. He had packed the bag himself. She didn't know what was in it. He opened her purse and took out her wallet and removed the credit cards, the joint card, the business card, and set them on the counter like they were receipts he was filing. He dug into his own pocket and put down what he had, a 10 and 4 ones. He smoothed them flat with his palm. "There's a bus station 12 minutes from here," he said. "I'll drive you. Your aunt's in Delwood. That's 3 hours. You can figure it out from there." She stood up. She picked up the $14. She folded them once and put them in her cardigan pocket, next to her phone. She did not argue. She did not cry. She picked up her purse with the emptied wallet and walked to the front door and opened it herself. Outside, the morning air was cool and damp. The neighbor across the street, Mr. Vance, was at his mailbox. He looked up. 2 houses down, a woman walking her dog slowed almost to a stop. Roland came out behind her with the bag, tossed it into the back seat of his car without a word, and got in. Danny walked to the passenger side and got in and closed the door. She did not look back at the house. There was no point. The bus station smelled like cleaning fluid and stale coffee. Roland bought the ticket at the counter without speaking to her. He handed it over and left before the transaction receipt had finished printing. She found her seat on the bus, window, 3rd row from the back, and set the bag at her feet and folded her hands in her lap. The bus pulled out slowly. The street outside blurred past, then the neighborhood. Then, briefly, the corner of Aldrin Road, where the house sat behind its oak tree. Then it was gone. Danny looked straight ahead. Her hands were still. Her breathing was even. $14 and a bus ticket. She thought about the photographs on her phone, all 41 of them, crisp and clear and exactly what they were. She thought about the Shell account summary, the hotel charges, the jewelry receipt, the condo lease with 2 signatures at the bottom, the falsified permits with the wrong initials in the corner. She thought about the 6 years she had given to a company whose name wasn't hers. The 14 months the money had been bleeding out while she changed her mother's surgical dressings and trusted the books to keep themselves. She did not feel broken. She felt, for the first time in a long time, completely clear. A boss herself smelled like cedar and old books. Meredith Whitaker was 71 years old and had never once asked a question she didn't already know the answer to. She opened the door, looked at Danny, looked at the weekender bag, and said, "You eat yet?" "No, ma'am." "Come in, then." She fed Danny soup and cornbread and didn't ask anything else. Just let her sit at the small kitchen table with the yellow lamp on while the evening settled in around the house. When Danny pushed back her bowl and said she needed to make a call, Meredith nodded once and went to her room and closed the door. That was why Danny had always loved her. She sat on the edge of the narrow guest bed, still in her cardigan, and dialed. Priya picked up on the second ring. "Hey, I was just thinking about you. How's the—" "I need you to listen to me," Danny said. A pause, just a short one. That was Priya's way of resetting. "Okay, I'm listening." Danny told her everything, not in a rush, not in pieces, but in order, the way she had always worked, building from the foundation up. The laptop, the account name, the Shell fund pulling client deposits, the hotel charges, the jewelry receipt, the condo lease, Vanessa Cole's initials on the falsified permits, and then Roland's face at the kitchen table that morning, the $14, the bus station. When she finished, the line was quiet for a moment. "He drove you to the bus station himself," Priya said. "He did." "And left before the receipt printed?" "Yes." Another pause. Danny could hear Priya breathing slowly, the way she did when she was thinking hard and keeping herself from saying the first thing that came to mind. "Send me the photos," Priya said. "All of them, right now while we're on the phone." Danny pulled the phone from her ear and opened her photos. 41 images, crisp and clear. She sent them in a single batch and put the phone back to her ear. She heard the soft chime on Priya's end. Then she waited. It took Priya about 4 minutes to go through them all. Danny sat still on the guest bed and listened to the occasional silence, the faint tap of a finger scrolling. "Danny." Priya's voice was different now, careful the way a person gets careful around something that has real weight to it. "This shell account, the deposits routing across state lines, this isn't just a divorce asset issue. This is federal fraud. Client deposit theft, crossing state lines, that hits wire fraud territory." Danny had known that, but hearing it said out loud, plainly by someone else, it landed differently. "How solid is the paper trail?" Priya asked. "Solid enough that he panicked when he realized I'd seen it," Danny said.
"That's the best answer you could have given me." Priya paused again. "Now, your role in the company. What can you document? Your own labor, your financial contribution, your work product?" "I have 6 years of reconciled books, invoice archives, payroll records I built from scratch, the permit filing system I designed." Danny thought for a moment. "I have emails where Roland forwarded my work to clients under his own name. I have the original business formation documents where I'm listed as a managing partner. He tried to revise that 2 years ago, but I still have the original filing." Priya made a sound, low and definitive. "He never had you removed as a managing partner?" "He tried. I found the paperwork. I didn't sign it." "Of course you didn't." There was warmth in Priya's voice now, underneath the precision. "Danny, you have real legal standing here, more than he ever accounted for. The court isn't going to look at this and see a wife who got cut off. They're going to see a managing partner who was forcibly removed from a jointly operated business." Danny pressed her thumb against the edge of her phone case. "What else did you find?" "I'm still looking." The tapping sound again, faster now. "Give me a minute." She gave her 2. "Okay." Priya's voice shifted, quieter, like she was reading something carefully before speaking it. "Danny, I'm looking at Roland's background through the state marriage registry. He was married before. A woman named Claire Hendricks, licensed in Abilene, Texas, 2009. "I knew about Claire," Danny said. "He said it was annulled." "It wasn't annulled," Priya said. "It was a standard dissolution filing, and the final decree wasn't signed until March of 2014. Danny was quiet. "You and Roland married in October 2013, Priya said. The guest room was very still. The cedar smell settled around her. The yellow lamplight from the kitchen made a thin line under the closed door. "So for the first 5 months of our marriage," Danny said slowly, "he was still legally married to someone else." Priya let that sit for just a moment. "He was confident about discarding you because he knew he had a fallback. He never believed the marriage fully protected you." Danny exhaled, long and slow. She wasn't surprised. That was the worst part. She wasn't surprised at all. "I don't want to move fast," she said finally. "I don't want to go loud. I want to build this right." "That's exactly what we're going to do," Priya said. "I need a few days," Danny said. "And then I need to make one phone call. An old family friend. He owns property in the city. I think he might be relevant to all of this." "Who is he?" "Someone Roland never bothered to remember," Danny said, "which means Roland doesn't know to worry about him." Terrence Boykin lived in a narrow brick house on Calhoun Street, 3 blocks from the edge of the Arts District. The neighborhood was changing fast. New coffee shops wedged between old tire shops,
murals painted over the plywood that used to cover broken windows. It was the kind of change that looked like hope from the outside, but felt complicated up close. Danny had been here before, years ago, when her father was still alive. She remembered the porch swing. It was still there. Terrence answered the door before she could knock a second time. He was 64, built like someone who'd spent decades on job sites, wide through the shoulders, hands like worked leather. His hair had gone fully gray since she'd last seen him, but his eyes were the same, clear and unhurried. "Danielle Whitfield," he said, not surprised exactly, more like confirmed. "Mr. Boykin." "Terrence." He pushed the door open wider. "Come on inside." The house was orderly and lived in. Tools on the shelf above the fireplace, a clean drafting table along one wall, coffee going in the kitchen. He poured 2 cups without asking and set them on the table. Danny sat down and told him everything. She was brief where she could be and specific where it mattered. The Shell account, Vanessa's initials, the bus ticket, Priya's findings about the legal vulnerability in her marriage. She didn't soften it and she didn't perform distress. She just laid it out, the same way she would have laid out a set of financials, accurately and in order. Terrence listened without interrupting. He wrapped both hands around his mug and watched her face the whole time. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Your father would have had something to say about all of this," he said. "Several things," Danny agreed. Terrence made a sound that was almost a laugh. "He was a straight-line man, never wasted a word or a step." He set his mug down. "You take after him more than you know." Danny looked down at her coffee. She let that sit. "I heard Roland's name come up recently," Terrence said. His voice stayed even. "In connection with the Alderman Street block, the city restoration contract." Danny looked up. "That's the one he's been positioning for. He's been working that connection for almost a year." Terrence nodded slowly. "He's been sniffing around, yes. Couple of his people came to look at the building on the corner." He paused. "My building." Danny went still. "I own the anchor property on that block," Terrence said. "Commercial space, 4 stories, been vacant going on 3 years. The city's revitalization plan runs right through it. Whoever develops that building is going to be first in line for the contract, because the contract's scope covers the whole block, and that property sets the terms for everything around it." Danny didn't speak. She was already thinking. "I turned Roland's people away," Terrence said simply. "Didn't like the energy. Didn't trust the numbers they brought." He looked at her steadily. "But I've been sitting on that building because I haven't found the right partner. Someone who understands the financial structure well enough to make the development pencil out and still do the work right." "What kind of financial structure are you thinking?" Danny asked. He told her. It was solid, straightforward but smart. A phased development approach that protected the initial investment and built equity incrementally rather than betting everything on the contract award. Danny asked 3 questions. Terrence answered all 3 without hesitation. Then she walked him through 2 adjustments to the model, small changes to how the construction draws would be staged against the city's payment schedule. He listened. He picked up a pencil and wrote something down. He nodded once, firmly, the way people nod when they know they've just heard something correct. "You do that in your head?" he asked. "I've been doing this a long time," she said. "So has Roland," Terrence said. "But I never got the impression he was the one actually doing it." Danny didn't answer that. She didn't need to. They talked for another hour. About the building, about the contract timeline, about what a new company would need to look like on paper to bid competitively. Danny knew the licensing requirements. Terrence knew the contractors. Between the 2 of them, the shape of something real started to form on the table. "The name matters," Danny said. "It can't have either of our family names in it. Roland knows your connection to my father. If he sees Boykin on a competing bid,
He'll start looking harder. Terrence agreed. Something that means what we're building. Something that holds. They went back and forth for a few minutes. Nothing forced. Danny was looking out the window at the old brick building visible at the end of the block. 4 stories of dark, solid stone, when the word came to her. "Ironwood," she said. Terrence repeated it quietly, tested the weight of it. "Ironwood Restoration," he said. "Yes." He extended his hand across the table. Wide palm, steady grip. Danny shook it. "We start the bid prep this week," Terrence said. "Yes," Danny said.
"We do." Her aunt's house was small and warm, with yellow curtains in the kitchen and a sewing table in the spare room that Danny had quietly moved to one side. In its place, she set up her laptop, a legal pad, and a coffee mug she refilled 4 times a day. She worked from early morning until late at night. The room smelled like cedar and old fabric, and somehow that made it easier to concentrate. She had nothing to prove to anyone in this house. That helped. Priya drove out on the second day and stayed for 3. She brought her own laptop, 2 thick folders of case notes, and a voice recorder she set between them on the table like a referee. They worked side by side the way they had in college, quietly competitive, filling the silence with typing instead of talking. "Okay," Priya said on the first morning, sliding a printed document across the table. "The licensing board complaint. Here's the structure. We lead with the permit paperwork." Danny studied the document. The falsified permits were the clearest point of entry, concrete, dated, and signed with Vanessa's initials in the coordinator field. There was no ambiguity in what those initials meant. Vanessa hadn't been careless. She'd been deliberate. She'd put her name on paperwork she knew was false, and she'd done it to protect a money trail that benefited both of them. Danny thought about that for a moment. Then she picked up a pen and got to work. The complaint named both Roland Whitfield and Vanessa Cole as responsible parties. It attached 6 permit documents, 3 sets of mismatched financial records, and a summary memo Danny wrote herself. Clean, precise, and completely without emotion. She had learned long ago that the most devastating documents were the ones that didn't editorialize. They just showed what happened and let the facts do the talking. She filed it electronically with the state contractor's licensing board on a Tuesday afternoon, confirmed delivery, and closed the tab. Then she opened another one. The petition for her ownership share of Whitfield Restoration took longer. It wasn't complicated in principle. She had years of accounting records, payroll documentation, and client contracts that bore her fingerprints even when they didn't bear her name. The work was there. The proof was there. Roland had just assumed that because her name wasn't on the company registration, none of it would count. He'd forgotten she was the one who kept the records. Priya drafted the legal framework. Danny filled it with numbers. Together, they built a case that was hard to argue with, not because it was loud, but because it was complete. Every invoice Danny had reconciled, every permit problem she had quietly solved, every client relationship she had maintained while Roland took the credit at dinner. She thought about that dinner, the way he'd spoken over her, the way the clients had looked at him like he was the one who'd figured it out. She wrote another page of documentation and kept going. It was on a Thursday evening, cross-referencing the shell account figures against older company records, when she found it. She almost missed it. The entry was buried in a transfer log from nearly 4 years ago, before Whitfield Restoration had any real revenue, back when Roland had told her he was investing her late father's inheritance in a business development fund. She had trusted him. Grief had made her easy to trust. She sat very still. The amount matched, not approximately, exactly. Down to the dollar, the sum her father had left her had flowed from a personal account she'd shared with Roland directly into the shell account's earliest seed deposit, the account that was never on any official record, the account that Roland had been skimming client money into for years. He hadn't invested her father's money. He'd used it to build the fraud. Danny set down her pen. She looked at the yellow curtains above the window, pale in the evening light. She thought about her father.
His voice, his hands, the way he'd saved carefully his entire life so that she would have something when he was gone. Roland had taken that too. She didn't cry. The feeling that moved through her wasn't grief anymore. It was something colder and more solid, the kind of feeling that doesn't go away and doesn't need to. She added the transfer documentation to the file, flagged it for Priya, and wrote 3 sentences in her notes explaining exactly what it meant and how it connected to the rest. Then she kept working. On Friday afternoon, Terrence drove to her aunt's house with a folder under his arm and his truck idling in the driveway. Danny came out with her laptop bag and 2 sealed envelopes containing the final bid documents: financials, licensing certifications, project scope, and the development model she and Terrence had refined across 6 working sessions. The submission portal closed at 5 o'clock. They sat in the truck in the driveway, Terrence's reading glasses on, both of them going through the checklist one final time. No rushing. No talking more than necessary. At 4:47, Danny uploaded the last document and hit submit. The confirmation came back in under a minute. Ironwood Restoration, City Contract Bid number CR-2024-114. Received. Terrence took off his glasses, folded them closed. Danny set the laptop on the back seat. Neither of them said anything for a moment. There was nothing to say. The work was in. What came next would come. The condo was on the 14th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen with marble countertops and pendant lights that cast everything in warm gold. Roland had signed the lease 3 weeks before he put Danny on that bus, though he hadn't mentioned that part to anyone. He told people they'd grown apart. He told his mother it had been mutual. The family dinner was at Odessa Whitfield's house, a wide brick colonial in a quiet neighborhood where she'd lived for 30 years. She cooked on Sundays out of habit, the table always set properly, cloth napkins folded into triangles. Roland arrived with Vanessa at 6:30, and Vanessa brought flowers that were too expensive and too showy for the occasion. Bright orange tulips in a cellophane wrap with a bow on it, like something from an airport gift shop. Odessa took them and said, "How thoughtful," in a tone that didn't quite match the words. She put them on the counter near the sink, not on the table. Roland didn't notice. He was already in a good mood, moving through his mother's house with the loose confidence of a man who believed things were going exactly right. He poured himself a drink without being offered one, found the remote, and lowered the TV volume by 3 clicks with the ease of someone comfortable taking up space. "You look good, Mama," he said, settling into his usual chair at the table. "I look the same," Odessa said, and brought the serving dishes out one by one. Vanessa talked through most of dinner. She described the condo, the views, the finishes, the rooftop terrace they had access to on weekends. She talked about how much lighter things felt now, how Roland could finally focus on growing the business without distractions. Without distractions. Odessa ate her food and listened. She asked a few questions, polite ones, the kind that give nothing away. She asked about the business. She asked whether the city contract Roland had mentioned before was still in play. Roland said it was locked in, practically speaking. He said his bid was strong and the competition was weak, and he had a good feeling about it. Vanessa smiled and touched his hand. Odessa watched that too. After dinner, Roland helped himself to more bread and started talking about the new site coordinator he'd promoted into Vanessa's old field position, the streamlining they'd done. He said the word streamlining like it meant something impressive, like it had been his idea. Odessa cleared the plates. In the kitchen, she stood at the sink and looked at those orange tulips sitting crooked in a vase too small for them. She had known Danny for 7 years. Danny, who stayed late at that same table going over paperwork Roland brought home in folders he couldn't explain. Danny, who had quietly corrected a billing error that would have cost them a major client and never once asked for credit. Danny, who smiled at Roland's stories even when they weren't quite right. Odessa didn't say anything at the table. She wasn't a woman who made scenes. But 2 days later, she ran into an old acquaintance at her church, a woman named Gloria who knew everybody and remembered everything. They talked briefly in the parking lot after the morning service. Odessa mentioned Roland's new situation in passing, with the careful neutrality of a woman choosing her words. Then she said, "Danny always did the real work, though. I hope somebody remembers that." She said it once. She got in her car and went home. By the time that comment reached Priya, passed through Gloria to a mutual friend who worked in the same building as Priya's firm, it was 10 days later. Priya texted Danny the exact words, no commentary added. Danny read the message twice and set her phone face down on the sewing table. She already knew it was true. It meant something different to hear it from Odessa. The trouble with Vanessa had been building since the week after the move. She knew the paperwork. She'd touched it, signed it, routed it herself. Her initials were on 6 permits she knew were wrong. And while Roland acted like the whole thing was buried and done, Vanessa was not sleeping well. She woke up in the night and thought about file cabinets. She thought about who else might have copies. She started asking Roland to clean things up. He told her she was overthinking it. She asked again. He told her it was fine. On a Wednesday morning, she went to the Whitfield Restoration Site office herself and pulled a box of old permit files. She didn't shred them there. She took the box to the dumpster behind the loading dock and broke them down by hand, tearing the pages in quarters. A subcontractor named Ellis was loading materials at the dock. He saw the initials on the torn pages. He had filled out enough permit paperwork in his career to know what he was looking at. He didn't say anything to Vanessa. He waited until she left, retrieved 3 of the torn pages from the top of the bin, and called the licensing board's complaint line that afternoon. The investigator assigned to the complaint Danny had already filed updated the case file the next morning. Additional evidence received. Destruction of permit documents. Investigation escalating. It was Terrence who brought the other thing to Danny's attention. He'd heard it from a project manager who'd worked under Roland 2 years back, a man who had no stake in any of it and no reason to lie. Vanessa Cole had been hired in the first place because Roland noticed a resemblance. Younger, easier to manage, simpler to impress. He'd told the project manager that his wife had gotten heavy and hard to deal with, and that Vanessa was everything he wanted without the complications. He'd promised her a junior partnership stake once Danny was gone, something to keep her invested, something to keep her quiet. Danny listened to Terrence tell it plainly, the way he always told things. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Did she know about the money from the start?" she asked. "From what he said, she figured it out early and went along with it," Terrence said. "Figured the partnership was worth it." Danny nodded slowly. There was something almost sad in it, and she let herself feel that without letting it soften anything. Vanessa had made her own choice. She'd put her initials on those permits knowingly, for gain, and she'd done it while telling herself it was opportunity. That was still a choice. Danny turned back to her laptop. The licensing board's investigation was active now, confirmed by a brief email from the board's public inquiry line that Priya had flagged that morning. The city contract decision was 11 days out. The asset petition was filed and moving through the proper channels. She opened the main documentation file and began her final review, checking each attachment in order, methodical and unhurried. Everything was in place. The announcement came on a Tuesday. It went out through the city's public procurement portal at 9 in the morning. A single PDF, 3 pages, posted without fanfare. The contract for the Meridian Arts District restoration project, valued at just under $2 million, had been awarded to Ironwood Restoration, LLC. The decision letter cited bid quality, licensing compliance, and financial accountability. Whitfield Restoration's bid had been disqualified from final consideration, pending the outcome of an active investigation by the state contractor's licensing board into falsified permit documentation. That was the language. Formal, dry, precise. It didn't need to be anything else. Roland found out at 10:15, when his bid contact at the city stopped returning his calls, and he checked the portal himself. He read the announcement twice. Then he pushed back from his desk and sat very still for a moment, staring at the wall. Then he called Vanessa. She didn't answer. He called the city's procurement office directly and got a coordinator who read him the same language from the letter, politely, and told him formal appeals required a written submission within 30 days. He hung up before she finished the sentence. He spent the next hour on the phone, calling people he knew, testing the temperature. A general contractor he'd worked with twice offered vague sympathy and said he'd heard something about a licensing issue and hoped it got sorted. A materials supplier was suddenly unavailable. A project manager he'd been courting for the Meridian job didn't call back at all. Roland poured a glass of water, drank half of it, and set it down harder than he meant to. He told himself it was a setback. He told himself the investigation would resolve. He told himself he had time. The call from the property manager came at 2 p.m. Her name was Sandra, and she managed the commercial lease on the building that housed Whitfield Restoration's main office. A solid, well-positioned space and a block he'd specifically chosen because of how it looked on client proposals. Professional address, good frontage. He'd been proud of that lease. Sandra's voice was measured. She explained that the building had been sold. The transaction had closed the previous Friday. She was calling to inform him that his lease would be honored through its current term, but that all future rent payments and correspondence should be directed to the new owner of record. "Who bought it?" Roland asked. Sandra told him. Ironwood Restoration, LLC. Roland didn't say anything for a moment. "That's a company." "Yes," Sandra said. "You'll be receiving updated wire transfer instructions for your next payment cycle. The primary contact for the ownership entity is listed as Danielle Whitfield." The line was quiet. "Say that again," he said. Sandra said it again. He sat with it for a long time after he hung up. Danielle Whitfield, his wife. The woman he'd handed $14 and put on a bus 8 months ago because he was certain she had nothing. No proof, no money, no move to make. The woman he had dismissed in front of his mother as dead weight. She owned the building. His company's office was inside a building that belonged to her. Every rent check he had sent since the sale closed, and he had to stop and count backward, had gone into an account with her name on it. He stood up, sat back down, stood up again. He went to the window and looked out at the street below, the foot traffic moving past, indifferent and ordinary, and something tightened in his chest that was not quite anger and not quite shame, and was actually both of those things, pressing against each other without enough room. By that evening, people knew. Not because anyone announced it. That wasn't how these things moved. They moved through text messages and side conversations, through a comment on a job site, through someone mentioning it to someone else over lunch. By 5 o'clock, 2 of Whitfield Restoration's active clients had reached out to request updated licensing documentation. One of them, a property developer Roland had worked with for 3 years, sent the request through his attorney. The other one called Roland's office line and left a voicemail. Polite, professional. The kind of polite that means something has already been decided. Roland did not sleep well that night. The next morning he was in his car by 8. He didn't call ahead. He told himself that was because he didn't have a number for Ironwood's office line, which was almost true. The fuller truth was that he didn't want to give her the chance to prepare. He wanted to walk in, look her in the eye, and understand how this had happened. and part of him still believed that if he could just get in front of her, he could manage it somehow, the way he always managed things. He pulled up to the Ironwood Restoration office at 8:47 and parked crookedly against the curb. The building was his old building. He'd walked through that front door dozens of times. He got out of the car, straightened his jacket, and went inside to find his wife. The front office of Ironwood Restoration was quiet when Roland pushed through the door. It smelled like fresh paint and coffee. The floors were clean. A young woman at the front desk looked up and asked if she could help him. "I'm here to see Danielle Whitfield," Roland said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Your name?" "Roland Whitfield." The woman picked up her phone, said something quietly into it, and then set it down and nodded toward a hallway. "Second door on the left." He walked down the hall like he owned the place. He had owned the place. Technically, less than 2 weeks ago, it had all been his. The thought made something flare up behind his eyes. He pushed open the second door. Danny was seated behind a wide desk, a neat stack of folders in front of her. She was wearing a dark blazer, her hair pulled back, reading something she didn't look up from right away. Priya Anand sat in a chair along the wall to the right, legs crossed, a legal pad open on her knee, a pen in her hand. Neither of them looked startled to see him. Roland stepped inside and let the door close behind him. "I want to know what you think you're doing." Danny looked up then. Her face was calm, not cold, not smug, just calm, the way someone looks when they have already decided what they are going to say and how they are going to say it. "Sit down, Roland," she said. "I don't want to sit down." "That's fine." She folded her hands on the desk. "Then I'll stand too." She stood, smoothed her jacket, and opened the top folder. The Shell account, Meridian Capital Holdings, LLC, was referred to the Federal Fraud Unit 6 weeks ago. Client deposit transfers across state lines, documented over a period of 31 months. I submitted 3 years of transaction records. She turned a page. The account shows $142,000 in misappropriated client funds. Roland's jaw tightened. "You had no right." "The petition for my ownership share of Whitfield Restoration's original assets was filed the same week," she continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "My name is on 8 years of payroll decisions, contract negotiations, permit filings, and financial statements. Courts tend to notice that." "You're trying to take my company." "I built half of it," Danny said simply. "I'm claiming what's mine." She closed the first folder and opened the second. "My father's inheritance, the $43,000 I trusted you to invest in 2019. She set a single sheet on the desk and turned it to face him. "That money is documented as startup capital for the Shell account. It's now part of the fraud recovery claim. The repayment is being legally enforced." Roland stared at the paper. He didn't touch it. The room was very quiet. The outer door opened, and then footsteps moved down the hall, and Odessa Whitfield appeared in the doorway. She was dressed neatly, as she always was, but her face carried something heavy in it. She looked at Roland first, then at Danny, and then she stepped inside the room without being invited. "Mama," Roland said, "this doesn't concern you." "Don't!" Her voice was short. "I know what the investigation is about. Sandra Miles called her cousin, who goes to my church, and I sat with it for 2 days before I drove down here." She looked at Danny. "I owe you an apology for a lot of things I chose not to see." Danny nodded once. "I know." Odessa turned back to her son. "I told you she was the one keeping that company upright. You didn't want to hear it." She set her purse down on the chair beside Priya. "I gave you $30,000 last spring when you said cash flow was tight. I want it back, Roland, whatever way that happens." Roland looked at his mother like she had struck him. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious," she said and sat down. Vanessa arrived 11 minutes later. She knocked once, then pushed the door open before anyone answered. She stopped when she saw the room. Roland, Odessa, Priya, and Danny all in the same space. Her eyes moved across each face quickly, the way a person looks when they are trying to read a situation before they're in it. She looked at Danny. I heard about the contract and the building. She kept her voice even. I understand you're going after Roland, and honestly, given everything... Your name is on the fraud referral, Danny said. Vanessa went still. The falsified permits bear your initials on 3 separate filings. The licensing board's complaint names you as a co-respondent. The fraud unit has the same documentation. That was... Vanessa stopped, started again. Roland asked me to... Did he? Danny's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Everyone in the room looked at Roland. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I never told you to falsify anything. You made those calls yourself. Vanessa turned to look at him fully. You sat across from me and told me exactly what those permits needed to say. I don't remember it that way, Roland said. The silence that followed that sentence was absolute. The site on Mercer Street smelled like sawdust and new concrete. It was a good smell. Danny had learned to love it over 8 years of managing Roland's company from the background, and she loved it more now that it belonged to her. She stepped out of her truck at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning, clipboard in hand, hard hat already on, and stood for a moment just looking at the building. It was a 4-story, mixed-use property they were restoring for the city's Arts District Revitalization Program, the same program Roland had been certain was his. The brick facade had been cleaned. New windows were going in on the 3rd floor. A crew of 6 was already on the scaffolding, moving with the easy rhythm of people who knew their work. Terrence met her near the site entrance, 2 coffees in hand. Foreman says we're 2 days ahead of schedule, he said, handing her one. That's because we planned it right the first time, Danny said. Terrence smiled. He didn't say much more than that. He never needed to. Her Tuesday mornings had a shape to them now. Site visit first, then back to the office by 10 for the weekly finance review she ran with 2 junior staff members. Both women, both new to the industry, both sharper than anyone had yet told them. That part mattered most to her. She remembered being the only woman in rooms full of contractors who talked over her, and she remembered doing her best work at 11 o'clock at night at a kitchen table while her husband took the credit at dinner. She wasn't going to let that be someone else's story if she could help it. One of her mentees, a 24-year-old named Camille, had asked her a few weeks ago how she'd learned to stay calm when people didn't take her seriously. Danny had thought about it for a moment. You just keep doing the work, she said. The work is the argument. Everything else is noise. Camille had written it down. Danny had pretended not to notice. She was walking the east side of the building, checking the subcontractor staging area against her clipboard, when she saw him. Roland was carrying a load of supply crates off a delivery truck and stacking them near the material intake point. He was wearing a plain gray work shirt, no company logo, no title. His hair had more gray in it than she remembered. His shoulders sat lower than they used to, like something was pressing down on them from above. He hadn't seen her yet. She watched him for a few seconds. Not with anger, not with satisfaction either, just observation. The same quiet way she had always processed things. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had run a long con for years, and then discovered that running it had cost him everything he was actually running it for. She had heard, secondhand and without seeking it out, that Vanessa was waitressing at a diner on the other side of town. Priya had mentioned it in passing during a phone call about something else entirely, and Danny had said, okay, and moved on to the next item. There was no thrill in it. There was no ache either. There was only the clean, quiet feeling of a door that had been closed for a long time and was never going to open again. Roland turned and saw her. His whole body registered it. His step slowed. His eyes moved to her face and then away and then back again, like he couldn't quite decide what to do with the sight of her. She looked well. She knew she did. Not because she was trying to. She had stopped trying to look like anything for anyone else a long time ago. but because she was sleeping through the night and eating real food and spending her days doing work that was entirely and undeniably hers. Roland looked at her the way a person looks at something they underestimated until it was too late to matter. He didn't speak. Neither did she. She held his gaze for exactly as long as it took to cross the distance between them on the walkway, and then she gave him a single nod, composed, direct, devoid of anything except acknowledgement, and walked past him without breaking her stride. She didn't look back. She kept walking toward the east wall, clipboard in hand, the noise of the site filling in around her, saws and voices, and the steady knock of work being done right. $14, a one-way bus ticket to somewhere he thought she'd stay. He had handed her both like they were the end of something. He had stood on the sidewalk in the early morning dark, in front of the neighbors, in front of the house she had helped pay for, and he had been so certain that she was finished. She thought about that sometimes. Not often. Just occasionally, the way you think about whether you survived. He hadn't taken anything from her. He had only shown her, in the clearest possible way, exactly what she was capable of carrying, and exactly how far she could walk on her own. She turned the corner onto the east face of the building. The crew looked up. "Good morning," Danny said, and got to work. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day!